Curtis, a senior advisor to America First Policies and America First Policies Action, and just got back from an overseas trip, undisclosed, but guy gets around, and he's finally back in the saddle and back in action and back on the air for his weekly segment here on your number one radio talk station in the history of America. Curtis, great to have you.
Mr. John Fredericks, it is so great to be back.
I know, it's been 3 weeks. It's like people were saying, where's Curtis Ellis? Is he dead? I'm like, no,
I was in India.
It's a special assignment in India.
A special assignment in India, you bet. I was charming snakes and meditating and taking yoga and meeting with all kinds of important poobahs.
Poobahs?
Poobahs.
Indians,
poobahs and nizams.
I was reading today that the Indian government has Amazon figured out. They don't like them.
No, they don't like Amazon. And what they've done is they're looking at a law that Amazon would be, they don't like when Amazon owns one of the suppliers. When you go out when you go on and you buy something from Amazon, let's say you buy a sweater or you buy a snake charming flute, right?
Yes.
And if there's 10 different snake charming flutes on the page, on the platform, well, if Amazon happens to own one of the companies that makes one of the snake charming flutes, they will push that further and more, and they'll sort of put their thumb on the scale so that you end up, customers end up buying the Amazon-owned product. So there's no level playing field on Amazon. That's the way the Indian folks look at it, and they're not too happy about that. So they've made some laws restricting what Amazon can do as a distributor to give special favoritism and become a monopoly by owning all of the companies that sell stuff on Amazon.
See, that is an interesting position the government is taking, in that they truly don't want Amazon to be in a dominant position, and they want competition, and so that's an interesting angle, don't you think?
Very interesting angle. You see, because India is a country of 1.3 billion people. Most of those people live in villages. So you've got a lot of small operators, small businesses, small farmers, small everything. And they don't want to see, the government does not want to see control by a giant corporation, any giant corporation. They've taken this attitude that we've got to promote the smallholder, the small business person, the small farmer, the small villager. They've got to have an equal shot at things. They don't want to see it all controlled by a giant mega company. And I think that's a very interesting point of view, and something we may want to consider and emulate in this country, because what you see now is these giant Amazons and Facebooks and everything in the giant coastal blue states doing quite well. But the rural parts of our country, and what the snide elitists call flyover country, they're not doing so well. The small towns, the small businesses, the small downtowns, main streets are getting wiped out.
Right.
So something's got to be done to remedy that.
Well, that's interesting, and again, interesting position for India to take. How's the economic climate there?
The economic climate seems pretty good. They're working away. I don't have the growth stats, but they've been they're chugging along this controversy. Now, the prime minister there, Modi, they call him India's Trump. He's a populist. He's not part of the ruling elite, the ruling party that's controlled India for most of its history. And there's a controversy over, he says economic growth is good, jobs are being created, but the opposition says, well, no, the jobs aren't being created, their economic climate is not so good. But I tell you, there's a lot of people with a lot of money, and apparently the statistic that the prime minister points to is they track the number of businesses that file for incorporation, and that number is way up. So again, it's another example of small businesses, entrepreneurship. So even though payrolls might not, if you look at the payroll number, the number of people on payrolls, the opposition says, see, that number's flat. The companies haven't added to their payrolls. But Prime Minister Modi says, but look at the number of businesses that are being incorporated. So that's the number to check, and that is way up. So again, small businesses, individual entrepreneurs, those numbers are way up. I mean, India is bizarre. It is a strange place. There's a huge informal economy, 1.3 billion people packed into the size of a boxcar, and it's crowded everywhere. And it's impossible for a government to track everything unless you try to do what China is doing, but that's another story. And so there's a huge informal economy. People work, but they're not on the books. People do things, but it's not being tracked, and it's almost impossible to track. Mm-hmm. And somebody was telling me the percentage of people in India that pay income taxes, 1%.
1%?
I mean, you've got people living outside the cash economy, and people living outside the formal official economy. So it's a very interesting situation.
Wow! And on 1%, they can fund the government?
Yeah.
I guess they don't have
the other thing is I was in Mumbai, Bombay,
yes.
And the richest man in India, he and his family built a residence. Mm-hmm. It's a 37-story skyscraper. 5 people live in it.
Wow.
For him and the 4 members of his family.
They got plenty
of course,
of space.
They have a few servants in there. They have a private medical clinic in there. They have a helipad on top. So there's a lot of money in India. This is the land of the Maharajas and the giant turban jewels, giant rubies and sapphires and diamonds, and it's a very, you see the past, present, and future coexisting before your eyes everywhere you go. You see people living on the sidewalk next to a cow, and then someone in a business suit gets out of his Mercedes and will feed the cow some grass, give the person tending the cow a couple of pennies for a handful of grass to feed the cow grass to gain blessings from the gods, because the cows are holy. So, and that's a normal scene in India.
Wow, interesting. Curtis Ellis with us. Curtis, a senior policy advisor with American First Policies. You can also read Curtis in a variety of different venues. Curtis, you had an op-ed out the other day on China. Where was that? I don't remember. I read it.
Yeah.
I just don't remember the
Well, before
platform.
I get to one last thing on India, for example, I stayed in Jaipur, which is they call it the Pink City. You had the Maharaja of Jaipur in the 1880. He looks like, you look at him, he looks like John Lennon. He had the city painted pink, had the entire city painted pink for a visit by one of the British royalty. His palace, one of his palaces, has been turned into a hotel, the Sujan Raj Mahal Palace, which is where I stayed. In the this is where Lord Mountbatten, the final British Viceroy of India, stayed. Queen Elizabeth stayed there when she came. Jackie Kennedy stayed there, and it's now a hotel, and anybody can stay there. And this is the type of opulence. And while I was there, I went to a wedding next door. The wedding, an Indian wedding, you had, it was unbelievable. I mean, it was the size of a football field. You had food stations on both sides, the size of a football field, going every kind of food you can imagine. They had a stage, drones doing the wedding videos. You had a Bollywood production on stage where the man and woman, the husband and wife, would act out they did a whole Broadway show. They had been rehearsing it for months. And this is India. And then you go outside, and the next morning we took a tour of people cooking food on the street, and some of the traditional ways they've been doing it for probably 500 years, making breakfast for the workers of Jaipur, which is known as the gem capital. So you've got people cooking food on the street next to a block away from jewelry stores that would make your eyes fall out. So
Interesting. Curtis Ellis getting back from a trip with India with some tidbits of interesting information. And, of course, the small business growth there, as you know, small business, the engine to really makes economies go anywhere in the world, U.S. one of them, no question about it.